Hello again, Year 8. Hopefully you found last week's or last lesson's instructions helpful. I had much fewer emails asking for help or directions, so I thought I would make another video which would help you with your lesson next. So the title of the lesson is, Why was the slave trade abolished? And some of you might be thinking, what is the word abolish? That is the word abolished. Is it in past tense? What does that word mean? And that's going to be part of your research today to find out what that word means. Some of us may already know. And we're going to look at how the slave trade came to an end over a couple of lessons. So this lesson is around the role of individuals. So by that I mean individual, largely men, who helped to stop the slave trade in the British Empire, because we're largely looking at it from a British perspective, because we're a British school. So first thing, obviously, you'll need to create a new Google document, as you have been doing. So you can put your title as what was the title again? Why was the slave trade abolished? So, why was the slave trade abolished? You can always put the date, you can put your name, whichever. So, go back for task 1 on the slide. So, task 1, I would like you to write a sentence explaining what the word abolish means. So, you're going to have to search for this yourself. Okay? Find a definition, look in a dictionary. And it will be there. So as a sentence starter, the word abolish means, okay, write that out in your Google Docs. Question number 2, what is the difference between the anti-slavery law passed in 1807 and the one passed in 1833? So again, you're going to have to search. So for example, anti-slavery law 1807. Okay, so have a look. Sorry, I spelled slavery wrong. Have a look at what this meant. There was an act, which means a law passed in 1807 to do with slavery, and there was also one passed in 1833. So have a look at the differences between the two, or how are they different? So again, the difference between the anti-slavery law passed in 1807 and the one passed in 1833 was, write that out on your Google document and finish off the sentence. Then I wanted to introduce you to a couple of individuals. One of the men who helped end the slave trade was this man here, Thomas Clarkson. He is a working class man, or he was a working class man, and he was on a committee, which means a group of people who campaigned for ending the slave trade. And one of the things is he realized that he needed to have the support of the general public. So he needed to educate people about what life was like for a slave, because obviously this is before television, this is before internet, and many people couldn't even read. So even if there was a book written by a slave or someone involved in the slave trade, for example, many people might not be able to read it. So he went around the country speaking to people about the slave trade and doing speeches and such. So lots of people were shocked when Clarkson spoke about the slave trade. They didn't understand, or they didn't realize what it was actually like for the slaves. Another man who is quite interesting is this man here, Oluda Equiano. Some of you will obviously, or hopefully all of you will notice that he's not white. He is an ex-slave, or he was an ex-slave. He lived a better life for a slave, shall we say, because he had quite a kind master who actually allowed him to buy his own freedom. So he was able to have a business of his own, and when he'd saved up enough money to pay his master back for the cost of him. He did that, so he was then able to have travel the world, and he became quite educated and could read and write. And he ended up publishing his autobiography, which means a book about his life. And he spoke about life of being a slave. And this was quite important because it showed people that black people could be educated, that they could think for themselves, and that they aren't just objects, that they do have brains. And then William Wilberforce is probably the name most people in Britain would have heard of. This is him here. So obviously, in order to pass a law in Britain, you need to have it go through what's called Parliament, which is a group of men who decide on whether to pass a law or not. So this man here, he is what's called a member of Parliament. So he sits in Parliament and votes on laws. And he was very passionate about ending the slave trade, and he regularly put forward the idea that it should end. And eventually, in 1807, he was rewarded for doing this campaigning, and a law was passed to end it. So, on that note, your task 2 is to complete a table researching each individual and their role in ending the slave trade. This is the table that I want you to complete. So Thomas Clarkson, Equiano, William Wilberforce, 3 men I've just discussed. So what was their role and how important were they and why? So if you've put them as 1, as in not being very important, why? If you've put them as 5, then why? Okay, so give an explanation. I've given you some possible websites that you could use here. There are many more, so you don't have to use these 2, but there are some examples. And then finally, on your Google document, I would like you to write, which man then do you think was most significant in ending the trade? Okay, significant means important. Who was most important in ending the trade out of the 3 men that you have looked at? Okay, so once you have done that, it needs to be uploaded onto our classroom. So if I go onto it, so if you're AI, that's fine. So upload it onto our classroom, and I will add it just like you would do for a homework. It is due in at the end of the day from when we're supposed to have a lesson. Okay, so the day we're supposed to have a lesson, it will be due in the end of that day, because you're supposed to do things when you're supposed to have that lesson. It's not supposed to be like a homework. Okay, so any other questions, let me know, and good job everyone.